The R7-1700 is a great processor, with multi-threaded performance rivaling that of the 6900K and not much worse single-thread performance than the 7700K. The R7-1700 at $330 is arguably the best all-around processor you can buy right now. But is it too good? What do I mean by too good? Well, the biggest problem with it is that it competes with AMD's own R7 SKUs, the 1800X and the 1700X, both at much higher price points. With the 1700 being able to be manually overclocked to within 0.1 or 0.2 GHz of the 17 and 1800X, it almost seems like a moot point to buy anything other than the 1700. Yes, an argument can be made that not everyone wants to overclock their CPUs, and therefore for those people, the higher stock clock CPUs do serve a purpose. However, I would counter with that the most people who are buying an 8-core 16-thread processor are not the people who are not willing to overclock their CPUs. Chances are, if you're willing to spend over $300 to $500 on a CPU, you have no qualms at overclocking it at all. This means that AMD is effectively undercutting their own sales of the 1700X and the 1800X and could have reduced their potential profits. Not to mention, they could be facing potentially dissatisfied customers that may have pre-ordered the 1700X or the 1800X expecting better overclocking capabilities and better price to performance than the 1700. And the thing is, they didn't need something so good as the 1700. It's not like the 1700X and the 1800X aren't good products within their own right. The 1800X, even at $500, is a great value when you compare it to anything that Intel has to offer in the same category. The same is true for the 1700X. It's just that once you take the 1700 into consideration, their value diminishes greatly. In the end, it's highly likely that AMD would have sold more of their $500 1800X CPUs if they hadn't made the 1700 and the 1700X so much better than it in terms of price to performance. Sure, they'll have sold a lot of it from pre-orders, and some people might still buy them even after knowing about the results, but to be honest, I don't see any reason right now to buy anything other than the 1700 from the R7 lineup, and I think most people will agree. So where did AMD go wrong? How could they have been smarter about the pricing? Well, all of it started when AMD announced last year that all of the Ryzen CPUs were going to be unlocked. The intention of the statement was mainly for PR purposes. After all, people have been tired of Intel's incremental improvements over the past 5 years, delivering minor speed increases, as well as Intel locking all but the best and coincidentally most expensive of their processors, putting a huge price premium on the ability to overclock. This is further compounded by the price premium of a Z-series motherboard, of which you'll need to overclock as well. By going after Intel's questionable marketing techniques, AMD hoped to rally some of their customers. However, unlike what most people tend to believe, locking CPUs to certain clock speeds is not simply a price gouging technique that Intel employs in order to squeeze every last penny from their customers. It also functions as a product diversification technique. And what that is just like how Intel has Celeron, Pentium, i3, i5, and i7 CPUs at different prices for different people, they also have different SKUs within those categories. For example, the i5 Skylake processors had the 6400, the 6500, the 6600, and the 6600K. They do this to bridge the price gap between the i5s and the i3s and the i7s. In the end, it's in Intel's best interest to offer a product at many available prices for many different customers. So how does locking CPUs relate to this product diversification? Well, first of all, you'll need to lock the processors in order to create this, because let's hypothetically say that the i5 6400, the 6500, and the 6600 were all unlocked. If that was the case, then no one would buy the 65 or the 6600, they would just buy the 6400 and overclock it to be the same, if not better, than the 6600. And in fact, with base clock overclocking, that almost happened. No wonder Intel tried so hard to shut down base clock overclocking, because it was directly affecting their sales of the higher end SKUs. Now going back to AMD. Imagine if they hadn't said that every Ryzen CPU was going to be unlocked, but left the option of locking their CPUs open. Now, a hypothetical Ryzen 7 lineup could have looked something like this. A locked R7 1700 with 3 GHz base and 3.6 GHz boosts, a locked R7 1800 with 3.2 GHz base and a 3.8 GHz boost, and finally an unlocked R7 1800X with 3.4 GHz base and 4.0 GHz boost. By doing this, AMD could have avoided the problem of undercutting their own products, as none of these products directly compete with one another. As an added bonus, the X notation now means that the processor is unlocked as opposed to what it means right now, which confusingly enough, it just means that the XFR range is 100 MHz as opposed to 50. What AMD could have also done was to bin the chips differently so that the higher end models had better overclocking ability. And in fact, that's what exactly many people, I myself included, thought that they were going to do once they announced that all of the processors were going to be unlocked. But once again, the results so far show that if AMD did bin the R7 chips, they did a terrible job of doing so, since most R7 1700s can be overclocked to 3.9 or even 4 GHz, which is basically the same as the 1700X and the 1800X, both at much higher prices. Not to mention, the 1700 actually comes with a stock cooler as well. Talk about salt on the wound. So I've talked quite a bit about how the 1700 was in many ways too good of a processor for AMD to have released. It undercut their own sales and could have cost them a lot of profit. However, the 1700 is also in many ways too good of a processor for the entire CPU market if you consider what impact it has on it. CPU progression has been very slow for the past 5 years now, and while many hypothesize that this was due to the lack of competition on Intel's side and that their complacency in novel development, however, it is equally possible that this could have been due to failure of Moore's law holding up and due to the physical limitations of microchip development. At its core, there is a lower bound on how small the transistors can be in a processor. It's approximately 1 to 2 nanometers, or about the atomic length of a silicon atom. As the manufacturing processes have shrunk over the years, we are rapidly approaching that limitation. In fact, with Intel now announcing a 3rd generation refresh of their 14 nanometer process, it hints at the difficulty of producing a 10 nanometer process. Even if somehow Intel were able to easily create a 10 nanometer process, it wouldn't necessarily mean a huge increase in instructions per clock. After all, we've gone from Sandy Bridge to Skylake with a minimal increase in IPC. All of this is to say that if the Sandy Bridge 2500K is still very much relevant today, albeit a little old, then the R7 1700 should be relevant for at least 5 years, if not more, due to the fact that it has 8 cores and 16 threads, and the fact that multi-threading is being more and more implemented. This means that all future CPUs that will be developed will have to be at least competitive in terms of price to performance with the R7 1700, meaning a lot less potential profits from both AMD and Intel. Now, while market disruption was clearly on AMD's agenda for their Ryzen release in order to bring themselves back into the CPU market, it's hard to predict what effect this will have going forwards once AMD has re-established themselves as more of an equal to Intel. Will this result in a return of rapid progression as we enter a new golden age of CPU development? Or will the physical limitations of a silicon chip finally be achieved? I don't think anyone can say for sure. Alright, that's about it for this video. If you liked it, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for future uploads. As always, thanks for watching and have a great day.